Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. So most of you have heard me say that you really can't make a commitment that you haven't already made, because every change in our way of doing things, or every way that we bind ourselves to a certain way of doing something, that time has to be right for us to have the capacity to do that. So we may have a desire to do something, but it's not the right time. And so then it means that we don't have what's called the bhumikara. We don't have the actual practical ability to put something into action because of the times, because our desire isn't strong enough, or the circumstances and our desire are not quite right. So, some people can quit smoking so many times because they know smoking's bad for them and they don't want to get sick, but yet somehow the desire to smoke is stronger than the desire to quit, until that day when all of a sudden it's over. I'm sure a lot of you have had that experience with something or other, where you try to change something a lot of times and it never worked. And then one day it was just easier and you just did it. You can look at these things in terms of astrology too, and see, when it might be easier or less easy to change some particular pattern. That's one of the useful pieces of information that you can get out of astrology. Commitments are really made before you make them. And at the same time, they're regularly imperfect. When we make a commitment, especially a commitment that has to do with our spiritual development, in a sense, we're making a commitment to be enlightened or to behave in an enlightened way. But we're not enlightened. We're only partially enlightened, right? And we're partially ignorant. So the degree to which we're able to keep those kinds of commitments is, a measure of how awake we are, how much real intelligence we are having access to. And when we take a vow or make a commitment or a sankalpa, set some kind of intention, or even when you take sannyas, you're both making a commitment that's already been made and you are developing something. So both of those things are true at the same time. So there's a commitment to fulfill that promise or that intention at the same time that there is a commitment to keep trying to fulfill that, and not in a light way. So if you have this kind of commitment in your life, and I have had, as I remember, I don't know if I ever had one when I was younger, but the first one of these kinds of commitments that I can remember consciously making was when I was in my 20s, my mid-20s, working in New York City as a tenant organizer. And I made some commitments to myself that resulted in some behavior toward other people, so that I could work with more confidence and a feeling of inner peace and less inner conflict with people who were much poorer than I was, and all different kinds of circumstances. And those commitments were to never promise more than I could deliver, and to deliver everything I promised, and to never lie. So those were the first commitments that I made in that circumstance, and they really changed my capacity. They were really a foundation for me, so that even, like, for instance, if I would go to a tenant meeting and someone would yell "kike" at me, I mean, it wasn't nice, but it didn't shake me. in the way it would have if I didn't have those commitments, knowing that I was being in integrity with myself no matter what was happening around me. So commitments can have this function too, that when you are sincerely and with integrity putting your commitments into action in your life, you become much less reactive and much less able to be thrown off course by circumstances or other people's behavior toward you or what anybody says about you. And there have been many, 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 many times when I've had to say or do things that became the occasion for people dissing me or whatever they were doing, being angry with me. And knowing that whatever I say or do comes from this place of integrity that is largely described by the commitments that I wrote out, really makes it possible for me to teach and just be in this circumstance. Now, I read an article that was published from a teaching that Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche did. It was a transcript from the teaching. It was published in the Mirror, the Dzogchen Communities magazine, about 27 commitments that he made to himself when he was a young teacher. And it really struck me reading that I had never articulated my own commitments sort of as a group. There's some of them that you've heard me talk about. I've never really written them out the way that I did the other day. And also that it could be helpful for both students and other teachers, because we often have the attitude in our culture these days of, I'll make that commitment later, or this isn't possible. I would like to make a commitment like this, but in my circumstance, it's not possible for some reason. Usually that just means because I want a certain outcome and I'm afraid if I make this commitment, I won't get the outcome I want. Or, you know, we just have the attitude, I want to do right, but not right now. And when we're spiritual practitioners, that doesn't really fly. Because if we have the wisdom already, if we already know what's right for us, we already know what is the dharmic way to tread, especially if we've been told by our teacher what is the right way, and then we just make a decision to go the normal way that we always go in line with our fixations and compulsions, then the repercussions are actually, in terms of cause and effect, a relative experience, the repercussions are usually more intense, especially when we have that little gnawing feeling inside that we are not doing the right thing. And when I say the right thing, I don't mean the right thing, like Moses' tablets. I mean, we each have a sense of goodness and rightness about how to move in a certain situation. And when we deliberately ignore that, we are not keeping our basic commitment as practitioners, period. We're not being in the state of our practice. And we usually know that that's what we're doing. And that is a situation where things can become very entangled for us and we can go through a little bit of a hard time. So it's better to try to maintain your commitments, which represent your integrity, which are expressions of your basic goodness. It's better to try and fail than it is to just shrug, right? Trying and failing is A-okay. Shrugging, not so much. Turning your back, not so much. So I want to just go over these pretty briefly. The first commitment is the very first commitment that I made, and that is to teach only what I have practiced and realized myself. That expresses the understanding that we're here to wake up. We're not here just to have some kind of intellectual experience. And I have the understanding that I'm operating from is that these teachings come to us from wisdom, even if they're coming through some human author or human practitioner. I have the understanding that the history of these teachings the ordinary human realm history of these teachings is secondary to the understanding that these teachings come to us directly from enlightened wisdom nature. And so there's what's called Vidya Shakti, wisdom energy associated with this stream of teachings and others also, not just this one. And that Vidya has to be respected by engaging with it in a real way as a practitioner and maintaining the capacity of those teachings to affect people in a real way and be adopted by other people in a real way. So that's why Jayakula has such a big emphasis on practice and less emphasis on study, although we do study. But I think that if we were in a less overly intellectualized culture, it would be fine to do more study. But some people are just much more comfortable just doing things with books and just having concepts of things and thinking about things. And we need to untrain ourselves from that. So we need to have, I think, a big emphasis on practice. And it starts with me. It starts with me only teaching things that I have practiced and have realized myself. Maybe not fully realized, but enough so that I have something to share with you that's of value. When I happen to talk about something, for instance, the Bardas of Death, this is always a moment. Somebody asks me about the Bardas of Death, and I say, well, I don't really remember the Bardas of Death, so I am just reporting things that I have been taught. I always preface things like that so that you can have confidence. I'm trying to maintain the integrity of this stream of teachings, but you can also have confidence that what I'm talking about is something that I've experienced. And because I've experienced, it means you also have that capacity. Because I'm just a person like you. All of us are all still on the path, right? I may have realized a bit more than you have, but I'm not fully enlightened. And I'm just, a working class practitioner slob like you guys. And that's actually encouraging because it means that you can just look and see how I've done things and what the result is. And you may do things differently, and the result may come at different times for you and in different flavors, but you're basically going to have the same result at some point or another if you just do this. And then the second, commitment to be honest and transparent in my dealings with students. I'm personally just allergic to any airs that teachers put on, the teacher voice or the spiritual teacher voice, or pretending that you don't fart or burp or, do whatever you do. And I definitely find that as I go along, I'm much less cautious about what people see about me and how I live, and I really don't think about it much at all. I think maybe earlier I did think about it more. I can't really remember, but it seems to me that things have loosened up more over the years. And I think that it's important for me, obviously, to be honest and transparent. But as you go along and as you wake up more, even though you're more skillful, you're less strategic. Because the skillfulness is just coming out. It's not being planned out. Every way that the teacher is manifesting, whether it's by shocking you or thrilling you or disappointing you or pissing you off or whatever it is that it is happening, all of that is your material to work with. And so if the teacher is withholding aspects of themselves or trying to act in a contrived way or premeditated way, then you as students, you lose opportunity.
Is it the tradition, or do you think that the teachers are putting on some sort of act? When we see Buddhist teachers, have that really quiet and slow. Do you think that that's just a Buddhist tradition and versus ours? No.
I don't think it's just Buddhism, but I think that the American Buddhist communities or even the European Buddhist communities, I don't really know where they got it, because certainly none of the Tibetan Buddhist teachers I've had from Tibet or from India were like this at all. And so they must have picked it up from somewhere. It's like a cultural voice. a cultural style of delivery. And I think it's supposed to convey equanimity.
Right.
But equanimity, if you can't laugh and fart, I'm going to just talk about farts. I mean, if you can't just be natural and be equanimous, if you have to speak in a monotone, very measured phrases, I don't know if that's equanimitous or not. It doesn't really seem so. So I actually just had this experience because there's a teacher I really love from Tibet who is just the most uncontrived, most sweet, funny, humble person. And I had occasion to watch some videos of one of his principal students on YouTube, and I just could not believe the contrast. So I'm wondering, like, where did his student pick up all this contrived way of delivery? I don't know. But certainly in the Indian tradition, there's many, many affectations of presentation. I mean, it's just very different. I think that my experience of American Buddhist teachers, the ones that I've seen anyway, which isn't a huge number, is that they are imitating equanimity and in some cases imitating fierceness. In the Indian tradition, I think they're imitating bhakti, right? Or imitating some sort of exaltation of some sort, and imitating piety, right? Imitating devotion. So there's a much more saccharine, over-emoting quality to it. It's really, really different than the Buddhist traditions, but it's very, very prominent, and not just in the US, but also in India.
I just read a section of book by Chogyam Trungpa, The Sacred Warrior, where he talks about the difference between imitating and emulating. Interesting, yeah. And emulating, it's not just like following the behavior of another person or the affectations. It's seeing something in them and sort of aspiring toward it or following it.
Well, I certainly feel that about Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Her open-heartedness, I'm following as hard as I can. Third one is, no matter what the circumstance, to try my best to embody open-heartedness and skillful compassion toward all. And what that's meant for me is just really doing that nitty-gritty work of going in and opening my heart, even if someone is being mean to me or leaving or doing something that, could potentially provoke reactivity in me, just to instantly turn away from that karmic track and go into my heart and try to be like Mom. I mean, not be her, but try to discover something of that total open-heartedness that she displayed in whatever minor way I'm able to do. And then the skillful compassion thing is, I think it's very easy to want to just try to make people feel better. We're in a tradition where can be confrontational. I mean, my job is basically to undermine your contrived, limited sense of self. That's a pretty hard job, and it requires some dramatic action at times, and it requires doing things that don't necessarily feel good to me, right? It requires sometimes ignoring people or deliberately not giving people what they want and provoking their dismay in some way or another. So all these things are very hard, but they are aspects of skillful compassion. So by committing to skillful compassion, what I'm really trying to say is not giving into the urge to just make nice with everybody. To try to do what's really the best thing that I can do in that situation, and not the thing that's just easier. The fourth is to always and only teach what is useful and appropriate for students. To never give teachings to students who are not prepared to practice them or teach only for money. This really came a little bit later. Those other commitments were things that came to me much sooner. But I realized that if you just give people lots and lots of teachings and pile them on, that most people don't know what to do with them, and it becomes a burden to them. So they come to a teaching and they can't practice it because they have so many other teachings they've been given, or it's just not the right time for them. I've told the story a lot of times before, before I was even teaching, but I was doing a lot of non-conceptual meditation, and a friend of mine who's just a powder keg of anxiety asked me to teach him meditation. So instead of teaching him some simple little meditation technique, I actually tried to teach him non-conceptual meditation. And he called me the next day. He said, I was so terrified about having to do this that I didn't sleep the whole night before. He said, I can't believe how terrifying it is to just sit. And that was a huge lesson to me. And it was that to not give teachings before their time to people who aren't ready for them, to the best of my ability. Obviously, I'm not always able to suss that out, but I do my best. So that people don't have that burden of having done practice and failed. And it's also important for people so that they want to continue. I mean, practice has its own difficulties anyway, even if it is the right practice for you. And you really don't need other difficulties that could have been avoided being piled on top of that. But that experience with that person, that friend of mine, really was what led to the 3 different staged levels of meditation that we do here, which has, I think, been hugely successful. That grew out of that incident. I learned a lot from that. I don't think my friend ever meditated again, though. Maybe I should call him up and see if he's ready for round 2. And teaching things just for money, of course, is de facto teaching things to people who aren't necessarily prepared for those teachings. And it's a really crass and disrespectful way to relate to the Vidya Shakti of your tradition. I don't think there's anything wrong with earning enough money to live on by a teaching at all. Teachers have to live just like everybody else. But if the world, aka wisdom, is not providing you with the living that you need, teaching the people that actually want the teachings and need and are ready for them, then my view is you should just earn money another way. Right? Just teach the few students that show up and then get a day job. We should never try to enlarge the number of students to make more money. To only act for the sake of the teachings and students and never for fame or recognition. So I try to only engage with the teachings in circumstances that will benefit students, that will maintain my feeling of integrity about the teachings. And I have turned down some significant opportunities because I didn't feel that they fit this description, and have even incurred the dismay or disapproval of people, not you guys, but people who asked me to do various things because I didn't feel that they were good for you or good for Jayakula or good for me. It's important to give up opportunities that are not in line with your sense of the value and goodness of the teachings. That's very important. To guide the Jayakula community to the utmost of my capacity so that it can be an authentic crucible for people who want to self-realize. And for me, this means being involved with the running of Jayakula in a really nitty-gritty way, so that things are done in a way that supports the teachings. It means being, looking out for certain pitfalls that I've seen happening in other spiritual communities and trying to guide things to go in a better direction. And it means, being involved in all of your lives in a very traditional way, or as traditional as we can get in our current setting, our current time, so that you can, if you choose, if you want to, have the experience of Akhanda sadhana, of unbroken sadhana. That's your choice, of course. I can't force you to do that.
How traditional could it be?
How much more traditional?
Right.
Much more traditional would be only those students who are willing, ready, and having the deep, deep desire to totally surrender to the whole process. I would only teach those students. and we would live close together, and it would be like a total immersion. So some people could have that experience anyway, but the fact that I'm teaching a lot of other people who aren't in that condition is not really traditional. There's a lot of stuff in the ancient tantras about the qualifications of a student and not teaching unqualified people. And I don't think I teach anyone who's unqualified. I mean, occasionally someone who I think is unqualified shows up and they like leave or stick around for a while and then leave. I don't really have to do anything about that usually. Usually wisdom just weeds them out somehow. And they're usually unqualified only because this isn't the right tradition for them, not because they're deficient in some way or another, but just because this isn't where they should be. They should be in some other tradition. So I think, there's a lot of partially qualified people. And I want to talk a little bit about that next week. But one of the qualifications is willingness to follow the instructions of the teacher, or even what is called the guru's hint. And the guru gives you some suggestion, being willing to follow that wholeheartedly, even if you have resistance. And there's very few people like that. I think that's a very unusual qualification in ancient times or now. And so that's why a lot of ancient teachers only had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 students.
In terms of like respecting the Vidya Shakti of the tradition, like how does that like work out like from you? I mean, it seems like you're respecting the Vidya Shakti, but then there's like this traditional way of teaching. So I'm just wondering, like, it seems like it's maybe a more modern thing.
Yeah, it is. My natural feeling is that whoever shows up is going to get something out of it. But I've also noticed, and I've talked about this before, that there's a natural response when people are not fully showing up. They can't get the most out of me. So I can't just open up the floodgates for someone who hasn't opened to this relationship with me and the teachings. I'm just incapable of it. And it feels like a very natural thing, even though sometimes my mind is like, oh, my ordinary mind, But this is where that skillful compassion just kind of kicks in, and it just becomes impossible to do something that the Vidya doesn't want me to do, right? Even though ordinary mind might want to. As Ma said, if you want everything, you have to give everything. And it's so, so, so true. And if you don't want everything, then you won't get everything right now. Just as a natural law, that's all that there is to it. So I feel like the Vidya is being respected through that natural process. I do not try to force anything. I think I used to more when I was younger and dumber and not as awake as I am now. But I think more and more as I go along, I don't force things. And I think that's a basic way of respecting the Vidya, is to just let that natural process of full reciprocity and partial reciprocity happen. That's really a very dualistic way of talking about it, because actually by not responding to in certain ways or not giving in certain ways, it's a mirror, right? And if a person is sensitive and intelligent, they can feel their own fixation in the face of that. Certainly, I could feel that a lot from my teachers. When my teachers seemingly gave me the face. You can see that look on Ma's face even in some photographs, right? If you're deep in your fixation, or you just don't want to deal with yourself, or you don't want to deal with it, you walk away from that. But if you've got some intelligence and your heart is a little open and your desire is strong enough, you will look into that mirror and see your real condition. So on an absolute level, everything is always as generous to everybody. There's no differentiation. You have to learn how to read the negative spaces in order to get that.
Are you saying that even partial reciprocity is full reciprocity?
Yeah. It feels partial on a relative level because it feels like you're having to turn away from somebody. Someone wants you to engage with them on the level of their fixation. This happens all the time with students, trying to drag the teacher into their world of fixation and participate on their level. And when you have to refuse to do that, it feels like you're not giving something to them, but you are. You're giving them a mirror if they can look into it. And there's nothing more fascinating than that flow of communication between teacher and student. I find it the richest field of exploration of anything I've ever experienced in my life. It's like a huge banquet if you're attuned to it and if that's what you want to be attuned to.
Is it rich because of the nuance and all the different modes?
Like an infinite subtlety. Yeah. Learning to read all the communications, learning to use everything that's happening to reflect and help you to realize. Like it's like an endless concert. And then the last thing I wanted to say about number 6 is just that it is my desire that this be a place where people can actually come and realize. Like, I'm not interested in being in a community or living my life with a bunch of people who are dilettantes. I'm just not. I mean, even dilettantism has its place and helps people, when they practice a little bit or sporadically, it's still good. But my desire is to be with people who are sharing in the experience that I've had. Right? I feel so grateful for the opportunities I've been given to realize in this life and to become more humble, to experience devotion, things I really never even thought of. The word humble was not in my vocabulary when I first started practicing in this tradition. Now I just have such deep feeling about it, right? So I want to pass it on. Like, I want to pass on what I've been given. And in order to do that, I have to be around people who aren't dilettantish. Because you have to work hard, right? You have to put in a lot of effort. You have to have a big desire, not little desire. To respond immediately to any actions or circumstances that limit Jayakula's ability to offer teachings and support to people who desire to self-realize, to not let unhealthy or harmful circumstances continue. And this certainly comes out of my experience in other communities where teachers are very distant, people aren't around the teacher much, or the teacher's just not paying attention, or the teacher is involved in their own fixations, and where situations that are really negative, situations that are harming people's ability to practice or undermining their confidence in the teachings, all kinds of different circumstances. You walk into a community and someone's nasty to you or doesn't treat you well in some way or another, or there's people running around on their high horse pretending to be Mahasiddhas or whatever they're doing. I mean, there's just so many different circumstances, just people being haughty, right? Those I consider to be really harmful situations because they deter people from wanting to practice, or not everybody, but they can deter some people. And in my mind, on a relative level, of course, the very, very worst thing anyone can do is cause someone else to not want to get teachings. These teachings are other teachings. I don't really care. But if some way that you're behaving or something you're doing or some gossip that you're promulgating or some attitude that you have is affecting other people and making them feel like this isn't a good community to be in, or these teachings must not be benefiting anybody because look how so-and-so is behaving, or just you feel discontent about something and just trying to get partners in discontent and partners in negativity. All of these things can just create a sour atmosphere. So I feel very committed to not letting that happen as much as I possibly can. again, because I want people to be able to have the experience that I had. And I think if someone's really determined, it really doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. You mean, when I was younger and practicing under teachers, I didn't really look up and see what anybody else was doing particularly. But that isn't everyone's circumstance. And we have to be aware that the real purpose of Jayakula is to be a crucible for people who want to realize. All of us who are dedicated, who love this tradition, who love the community, who have confidence in the teachings, we should all be protecting this crucible. I don't mean defending it against criticism. That's not what I'm talking about. There's always room for legitimate critique. I'm talking about running your fixations in such a way that it creates a bad atmosphere for other people. To protect and honor the teachings by never authorizing unqualified people to teach. And I only mean one thing by unqualified, and that's people who haven't realized the practices that they might be teaching. They don't have much realization or enough realization to teach anyone else usefully. Be ready and willing to let go of any student, any teaching, any earnings, any recognition, Jayakula itself, the good opinion of others, and any other circumstance, if doing so would serve the purpose of supporting myself and others to self-realize. Everything is impermanent, and if anything were ever standing in the way, including this organization itself, including me holding on to anybody thinking well of me, or any circumstance at all, if anything were an obstacle to myself realizing or to any of you, or I would immediately drop it.
You would leave us?
If you needed me to leave you in order for you to self-realize, I would leave.
But even if you
I can't imagine that circumstance, but but there was a teacher I heard about, I don't even know who it was, years ago. He felt he had some realization, and he started teaching, and he had students, and then at some point he felt he lost his realization. He lost contact with whatever it was that he had felt in contact with, and after a time, he just stopped teaching. I don't know if that circumstance was how it actually was, but I think that shows a lot of integrity.
And you dare.
I really don't think that's going to happen. But
What would be a circumstance in which you would let go of a student?
oh, I've had to let go of many students. I just meant let go, like, first of all, when people leave, not to chase around after them, to let people go when they need to go. I've also actually asked people if they wanted to give up their initiation when I felt like it was just a burden to them. I just called them up and said, hey. And when that happens, I do my own ritual to absolve that person of that initiation. So that's on one level. And then there have been a couple of times when students have just left in a very bad way. And I'm going to talk about that next week. What's a good way to leave a teacher and what's not. And those people, as much as I feel for them, as far as I'm concerned, their samayas are completely broken. And just letting go of that, just letting go of reactivity to that. But it also means really letting go of people that I felt close to. I can't think of any other circumstance. There have been people that have gone to study in other traditions. They decided they were reborn Christians or whatever, And it's just being open-hearted about that, right? Not trying to hinder anybody from doing what feels right to them.
You also said if Jayakula became an obstacle to your own realization, you would drop it.
That's right.
Good to know.
So keep those brownies coming.
That's what comes down to.
As I was sitting in I was in the co-op the other day, drinking this marvelous chai with organic, unpasteurized milk, and eating this little flourless chocolate thing that had sake paste in it. I thought to myself, I really am going to be born into a realm with only gray wafers next time. I'm using up all my good food karma in this lifetime. It's all over next time.
I mean, I just really appreciate hearing you express your commitments in this way. I feel what a crucible it creates for us. And it makes me want to do it myself. We take certain vows, but I've never thought of expressing what my actual commitments are.
Personal commitments. That's one of the reasons I wrote them down and I'm giving this teaching in the hopes that other people will see that this kind of way of being in the world is possible. You don't have to compromise. You might fail in moments at keeping your commitments, and most of us surely will, but you do not have to compromise the effort to keep them. There is no circumstance on earth that could cause me to compromise the effort to keep these commitments, period. I might not do them perfectly, and certainly I have done them imperfectly at moments, right? But nothing could make me compromise that effort or not engage in that effort. And that is such a solid foundation for being in this very rough and tumble kind of tradition. It makes you feel your goodness. It makes you feel like you're aligned with wisdom. I feel aligned even when the winds are blowing 100 miles an hour. Because of these commitments. And when I say disband Jayakula, I don't mean stop teaching you. I mean that Jayakula is an organization.
Oh. That's different.
I keep hoping that it will hinder me in some way. I was having this fantasy the other week. One morning I woke up and I just thought, I wonder what would happen if in the middle of the night I got up and I just deleted the Karocracy Slack and I deleted our asana account. Everybody woke up and the next day and it was like,
It was just a dream. I thought it was a dream.
take away everyone's access to Dropbox.
Printed the Constitution.
It would be so fun to do that.
I have a question about commitment. I think I've always struggled with commitments because I'm very hard on myself. So I feel like I shouldn't even make commitments because I know how bad I feel if I don't keep my commitments. So I'm wondering whether what's the right good way to approach that?
The good way to approach that is don't make any commitments that you don't feel a desire to adhere to. In other words, we can't make commitments just based on some ethical system where we think something is right or we ought to. Those kind of commitments are very onerous. They're very difficult and dry and hard to keep. It requires an incredible amount of effort to keep. But the commitments that are right for us have an aspect of joyousness to them. So even though we might not always be able to keep them perfectly, we still feel that wholesome desire to keep them. And that's the most important thing. Being willing to be seen making mistakes and also to be easy on yourself when you make mistakes, when you stumble, is an aspect of humility, because it's only pride that ties us in knots when we're publicly making a mistake or not able to do something we said we would do. That's just pride when we get all upset and intense about that. It's also an aspect of just understanding that we showed up as human beings and we have a long way to go in terms of waking up, right? So we just have to have very positive, practical attitude towards our failings. And when they happen, we just pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and keep going without complaint or browbeating, right? Because that browbeating is just also an aspect of pride.
I kind of have a similar question. I was thinking how easy it has been for me to make commitments and how I often desire to make commitments and then give myself sort of easy outs from follow or keeping the commitments in a lot of different ways. And so I've broken commitments. I wonder if you can just talk about that situation a bit, because like in terms of this path, that commitment from the beginning has felt like, I mean, the desire to keep that commitment has felt really strong. And yet I've broken aspects of my samaya. I think it would be really good for me to write out my commitments, my personal commitments. But is there anything else that you want to say about that?
You have to follow a lifestyle that supports your clarity. You still don't do that. That's where you have to begin. Because what happens is you lose clarity. And then you just sort of like slurb off in some direction. That's what I think of the perfect word for you. Yeah, it's like suddenly you just kind of go out and then you're just over this way.
Yeah.
Right, when you should be going this way.
Right.
And it's because you lack clarity in those moments. You don't eat for clarity. You don't sleep for clarity. Mm-hmm. Your day-to-day activities aren't built around developing more clarity. Mm-hmm. You need to start there. We always have to be remembering what it is we actually want. And I think writing down these commitments is great. Anyone has any to write down. But that's what pulls me back, is just remembering what it is that I actually want. What is actually of most value to me, most important to me. I'm faced with a choice of like, should I have one of Alice's unbelievably, incredibly delicious brownies? Or should I get a good night's sleep tonight? Okay.
Are those exclusive?
Yeah. Right now, I'm on antibiotics and my biome's all messed up.
No.
Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.